Tom's doing some stuff that, you know, it's really thought-provoking, and the whole idea of how we're supposed to care for a tortoise really, in some ways, has been turned upside down. And the results, actually, the proof is in the pudding, is the best way for me to kind of say what I was going to say. So I'd like to thank you guys for coming out and present Thomas. And would you like a mic, or are you just going to talk loud?
I think I'll just talk loud.
Okay.
Hi everyone, I'm Tom. If anybody can't hear me, I'll talk louder. I find it helpful in these things for you guys to know who's standing up in front of you talking. You know, how do I know what I know and where did I come from? My interest with tortoises started when I was 1.5 years old. I have a picture that I just recently found of my dad holding me in the Galapagos pen at the San Diego Zoo, and my feet are on the back of a Galapagos. I haven't sent it to him yet, but it's a cool picture. When I was about 7 years old, I somehow hoodwinked my poor mother into letting me get a box turtle. So that was my first foray into Shalonian husbandry. That was an adventure. Around 1986, I started working in pet stores, and I was the reptile guy and the fish guy. So since 1986, I have been paid to take care of turtles and tortoises on a daily basis, continuing through now. In 1991, the pet store I was working in, this guy comes walking in. I didn't even know his name. I didn't know who he was. He came walking in, he had a little tub in his hand. And in this tub, he had some babies that he wanted to sell us. And me and the other reptile guy are going, oh, what is this guy bringing us? We thought it would be another iguana that somebody was turning over something. I look in the tub, and there are about 10 baby sulcatas and 10 baby leopards. And this is the first time that I had really seen either one of these two species outside of adults in a zoo or something like that. These were captive bred babies. Right then and there, I bought one for myself, we bought a few for the store, and we started caring for those. So that was my first sulcata tortoise, was 1991. Back then, they were very rare. They were just starting to breed them. They weren't like they are now, where everybody and their brother is breeding, 500 a year. So this began my obsession, my quest, to figure out why they look a certain way in the wild and why they don't look that way when we raise them in captivity. I read all the books, I did all the studying, and I was raising my tortoise just the way you were supposed to, the way the books all said to do it. I was familiar with herbivore diets because I've been raising iguanas and senators, spiny tail Mexican iguanas, and so I knew how it was supposed to work. I had been doing Solomon Island skinks, and vegetarian diet wasn't a mystery to me, so I fed my tortoises the same way. Well, they pyramided. Remember, we're talking 1991. So I talked to the experts, I went to the shows, I talked to the breeders, I said, why did my tortoise pyramid? What did I do wrong? And they said, well, you fed it too much grocery store food. That kale and that collard greens and that kind of stuff, it makes a pyramid. They don't have that in the wild. They eat dead dry grasses and hay and leaves and things like that. So I go to my good friend at the Casa de Tortuga, Walter Allen, some of you may know him, and he sets me up with another one. I take this one, I'm picking out the one I want. Walter comes over to me and says, you can't take just one, you need two. Give me the buddy. Well, I didn't know any better, so he's giving me a free sulcata, and at that time they were very valuable. Thanks, Walter, I took 2 home. So armed with this new knowledge, now I know they need lots of sunshine, lots of exercise, and they need all natural diet, not so much of the grocery store foods. So I build a 30-foot by 12-foot pen outside my house. If the weather's above 70 degrees and sunny, these tortoises are out from hatchlings. From day one, they are outside. And this simulates, so I thought, so the books say, the dry, natural environment that a sulcata comes from. Well, lo and behold, first picture, please. Here they are. This one here, that's Bert, and this one here is Scooter. Those are the 2 that came from Walter Allen. And this little one here is a girl named Dolores that was given to me by a friend. I don't know where she came from. She was about 3 inches long when the friend gave her to me. And so this is the product of all natural diet. I skipped days feeding because it's another thing they said was, well, we feed them too much in captivity. They grow too fast, and this causes a pyramiding. So I fed them every other day. These were some hungry tortoises growing up, let me tell you. So that was about 1998 when I got them. These pictures are from about 2010, 2012. So 14-year-old sulcata tortoises, the weight on this guy right now in this picture is about 50, 55. The weight on this guy is about 55, 60. So they were very small for 14-year-old sulcata tortoises. That tells you how little I fed them, how slowly I grew them. And they were out in the sun all day long, so it wasn't a UV shortage or anything like that. Indoors, they were on rabbit pellets. They had a heat lamp for cold days, which we don't have a lot of. I live in Santa Clarita, by the way, if anybody's familiar with the weather. They're pretty hot and dry, pretty similar to out here. Next slide, please. Some more pictures of these guys. This was a rescue that was given to me. This one was raised in an 8-foot by 8-foot little enclosure on dirt. It had a 4-foot by 4-foot fruit pen, you know, the containers they hold the fruit in. It was upside down and had a heat bulb hanging from the ceiling. So again, better natural diet. This is an example of how bad the pyramiding can get. This animal doesn't show any of the metabolic bone disease that you typically see, but obviously pyramiding is significant. On the top of these scoots, you can't see it in these pictures. I don't know if I have them listed. The overhead lamp burned the keratin on the top of the shell, and so the bone is exposed on the top of those super high pyramids. Didn't seem to hurt her. She'd been living that way for years. I cleaned it up and put betadine on it and kept it dry, and didn't seem to cause her any problems. But this is just an example of what I'm trying to figure out why it's happening and what's going on. I'll talk to you. I'll get your question later. Next slide, please. Here's another one. This is the companion that lived with that one. Same thing. You can see the same odd, but there's these ridges here where it seems like there was something else going on that contributed to it. Go ahead on to the next one. We got a lot of slides to get through. Here's an overhead view of my original 3. No, that's one of my rescues there. That's my little Dolores. And this is the boy chasing after him. Go ahead. So when I got into sulcatas, remember, nobody was breeding them. We were just at the dawn of sulcatas. So raising these babies to adulthood and breeding them was a big goal of mine. Now we all don't need to breed them anymore, but back then it was a big deal. So that was what I was after. Here you can see, I don't know, you can't see in the picture. They're eating grass and weeds. That's most of what they eat at my place. Go ahead on to the next one. Now we move into failure after failure after failure. Why, when I'm following all this expert advice, I'm talking to the breeders, I'm going to the reptile shows, and these guys are telling me, hey, this is how you do it. It ain't working. Nothing I'm doing is working. I'm feeding them hardly ever. They're starving to death. I'm growing them so slow. I'm feeding them only the right foods. I'm housing them hot the way they say they're supposed to be. You know, I'm doing my temperatures right. I let them drop at nighttime like they say. That's more for Mediterraneans now, I know. Why am I failing? It was driving me crazy. I almost quit doing tortoises entirely. I used to keep a lot of leopards too. After about the 12th one, I said I give up. Until somebody figures out what's wrong with these things and why they won't grow smooth like they do in the wild, I'm not doing it anymore. So I had my sulcatas from Walter, and I just sort of put it in the back of my mind. I fed them and took care of them every day, but I was done with tortoises. I was a failure. I couldn't make it work. I didn't understand. Nobody could explain it, so I quit. I did a job in New Orleans. I walked into this pet shop, and there on the counter is about a 10-inch sulcata. Beautiful, smooth shell, just looked like a wild caught. Now, we're talking 2007. There's no way it was imported because we stopped importation. And I'm looking at this thing going, how did this happen? So I asked the guys behind the counter, where did this tortoise come from? They said, well, one of the guys that works here, his uncle raises them, and you know, we're in New Orleans now. You know New Orleans weather, it's hot and humid all the time. And he raises them outside, and this was an extra one, and he wants us to sell it for him. And I said, well, do you have any more? And they said, well, yeah, and back in the reptile section, we have another one that came from the same clutch as this one, but we raised that one. So I go back and look in the back. It's the normal-looking pyramided, just like this. Normal-looking pyramided one. It's raised in captivity. It's on rabbit pellets. It's under a hot bowl. It's in the reptile room back in the back of the store where it's very dry and arid, just like everyone in the books say it's supposed to be. The one in the back looks just like this. It's about a third the size and is all lumpy. Now these were clutch mates according to the guy at the counter. They were born at the same time, actually at the same time rather. The one on the counter was raised outdoors in Louisiana, eating weeds and grass. This one, the one in the back, not this one, the one in the back was raised in a dry enclosure on rabbit pellets and fed, you know, grocery store foods and things like that. A third the size. So I started going, on this same job, I'm working with a guy who's from South Florida. We're talking about this and that. Well, we're into reptiles. I'm into reptiles. What do you have? He goes, oh, I got a couple of tortoises. Really? What kind? Sulcatas. Let me see your pictures. He shows me his pictures. He's got giant 50, 60-pound sulcatas. How old are they? 5 years old. Oh, you mean you've had them 5 years? No, they're 5 years old. I raised them from hatchlings. No. Super, super smooth. How are they so big? What do you feed them? Oh, they just eat the weeds and grass in my backyard. Oh, and then they climb up on the porch and they eat all the cat food out of the cat bowls. I said, so these things have been eating dry cat food all this time, all these years? Yeah, you know, I know they're not supposed to, but it doesn't. Anyway, the point of the story is we're in South Florida now. It rains all the time. There's puddles everywhere. It's always humid. These things are just living loose in this guy's backyard, and they are super smooth. They look like a wild caught. Eating entirely the wrong diet. Grocery store greens and cat food is their diet. So the wheels are turning. So I come back and I start saying, well, maybe there's something to this. About this time, if you remember 2007, I saw the book in the back there. Jerry and Richard Fife released their leopard tortoise book. I talked to Richard Fife about this on the phone. His wife discovered quite by accident they ran out of space. They had a bumper crop one year and they were out of space for their leopard tortoises. So they threw some into the box turtle enclosures where box turtles usually go. They ran out of space. In the box turtle enclosure, they have damp substrate and they have a humid hide box. These leopards went in there and they just were selling them as fast as they could, but they didn't have any place to put them in their normal leopard tortoise enclosures. That year was the first year that he ever grew smooth, baby leopard tortoises. All of those leopard tortoises were going faster than the ones normally did, even though he's feeding them the same as he always had year after year, but those ones were growing smooth. So about this time, now I'm starting to get some ideas. Maybe this humidity thing has something to do with it. So I can't take credit for this. I've discovered it all from other sources. I didn't invent this. I just put all of these puzzle pieces together and started running my own experiments. So my adults finally get old enough to start breeding, and we'll get into those next. But first we have Daisy. A friend of mine, he's one of my mentors. He's a reptile guy. He offers, hey, I got extra sulcatas. You want a free one? And I'm thinking, yeah, well, I need to figure this out. So I go get Daisy. This is her. She's 3 months old in this picture. You can see she has significant pyramiding. Raised indoors in dry enclosure, fed a lot of Missouri. I get her, and now I know how to prevent pyramiding because I read the Fife's book. I've seen these tortoises from other parts of the country. I'm going to raise her with a humid hide box, and I think it's going to stop the pyramiding. I start doing it, a couple months go by, nothing happens. And it's frustrating because she's not growing all that much, which is another thing that we'll get into. But it doesn't seem to be doing anything with the pyramiding. This is where I began to learn the difference between preventing pyramiding and stopping pyramiding that's already significantly in progress. So she's already in progress. So what I do with her, I call her my guinea pig nowadays. I changed the substrate. I took the dry substrate out, I put orchid bark in, and I kept making it damper and damper and damper and damper. I gave her the humid hide box. Go ahead, let's keep on moving. Next slide. More pictures of her at a young age. Keep on going. Keep on going. This is what I came up with. All right, I'm using damp substrate. I'm using a damp humid hide, but my area is single-digit humidity. It is so dry in this thing, I get a hygrometer in there, and it's registering like the minimum. I still can't get anything. I'm spraying the enclosure. A guy who keeps redfoot tortoises in Tennessee, he tells me, you know, one of the things we do to grow our redfoot tortoises smooth is you spray the carapace. So I start spraying the carapace and the entire enclosure. I'm trying to raise humidity, and I'm failing. So I come up with this little enclosure. I make a little wooden top to kind of cover it all. There she is soaking. Make a little light stand. So most of the top is covered. I'm trying to hold in some of that moisture that I'm trying to create. Failing miserably, but trying. And I still go on to the next. Here's the inside. So she's got your typical heat lamp. The room is 80 degrees all the time. It's my reptile room, so I don't have any night heat on it because it stays warm in there. Damp substrate, well, wet substrate at this point. She's got a little log hide. This is her little humid hide. And I'm soaking her every day. You saw the soaking in the last picture. Keep on going. Next one. Here's what I came up with for outdoors. I thought, well, I'm still sunning her outdoors because we all know sunshine's good for them. I wanted somewhere where she could get underground to simulate what a sulcata does in the wild. Keep on going. Here's my little thing I came up with. This is the little underground chamber. It's got a lid that goes on it. This is the tunnel that comes up. This is before it's all buried. Keep going. Now I'm starting to bury it all. I can lift that lid and get to her anytime I want. Here's our tunnel to go in. This is, this is the uphill side. This is the downhill side. So when it rains, all the water goes down. It never goes down into the tunnel. Keep on going. There she is coming out of it. Go ahead. She's getting a little older now. You can see she's put on a little size. Pyramiding hasn't stopped. I was frustrated with this, so I kept adding more moisture, more moisture. Pretty soon, you could keep a red ear spider in her enclosure. You've all read the books. If you keep a arid species of tortoise in this kind of humidity and dampness, what's going to happen? Shell rot and respiratory infections, what all the books say. Guess what? Not true. It doesn't happen. It didn't happen in my case, in this case, and then I've done it hundreds of times since then. It doesn't happen. Sulcatas are not prone to shell rot at all. Even in bad conditions, they still don't get shell rot. They also don't get respiratory infections unless you let the temperature drop. If you keep your temperatures up, they don't get respiratory infections. Same thing with leopard tortoises, same thing with California desert tortoises, same thing with Burmese star tortoises. The Russians I do a little different, but anyway, let's keep going. So you can see the pyramiding isn't getting any better yet. Again, I'm still learning that there's a difference between preventing pyramiding and stopping pyramiding in progress. Stopping it in progress is, you got to swing the pendulum the whole other way. That's a big deal. Keep going. Get a little older. Still, I'm not seeing any change. Keep going. You can see the new growth coming in. Slightly different angle. Not a lot different. She's still significantly pyramided, but that looks a little different to me than the initial angle up here. Keep going. Here she is getting a little older. Keep going. They look so nice when they're wet. My friend Dean got on the tortoise forum and he said, sulcatas can't swim. I said, yes, they can. Went and took these pictures. She swam quite nicely. Now the debate is, they can't swim once they're over 35 pounds. I haven't tested this yet because I don't have a big enough tub. I put them in the big tub and they can reach the bottom. So anybody that wants to tell me whether they can swim at 35 pounds, I'm all ears. But I soaked her every day. I didn't soak in water this deep. This was just a quick thing to show Dean. Go on to the next one. Here she is getting a little bigger. Go ahead. This is an example of my outdoor pens at this time of year. They just get this tall. There's nothing but grass and weeds, and it's all good stuff, and that's what they eat. I don't feed my tortoises this time of year. I love this time of year. More rain, I hope, on Saturday. Keep on going. Now you can start to see this new growth is coming in the last few months. Is looking a little bit different than this initial angle. You can start to see the angle of the pyramiding start to change. Keep going. You can see it really well in this. All of this stuff on the side is pretty smooth. We still have the raised portion, the lighter colored portion from when she was younger, and that was her original growth. The new stuff that's coming in darker, you can see is coming in completely smooth. This now, she was 3 months old when I got her. These pictures are when she was about 3.5 years old. So for almost 3 years, she hardly grew at all. And then all of a sudden, she started to try to catch up to all the other sulcatas that were growing at a more normal rate. Go ahead. Here you can see it a little better. You see these knobs sticking up the light colored bit, but all the growth coming in under is finally coming in smooth. This tortoise never showed any symptoms whatsoever of shell rot or respiratory infection, ever, no problems of any kind. She's always eaten like a horse, pooped really well, nice solid poops, everything good, everything that you could possibly imagine as it should be, but she's being kept in that very, very humid enclosure and getting soaked every single day. And I've heard all sorts of things like if you soak them every day, it speeds up the gut transit time, they don't digest their food properly, and all these other things. I have found that to not be the case. Keep going. Here she is. We'll get to these little guys soon. That's tough right there. Now you can see the smooth growth coming in this profile picture. It's still not perfect, but it's looking much better than it was, and it's obviously not on the course that it was on. I think this tortoise would have ended up looking like my rescued adult that I showed you in the beginning. She's starting to look significantly better. Keep going. There she is challenging with. There's one of my rescues. So I like this picture because it shows in profile. That's one of the rescues that I got that's really badly pyramided. This is my Daisy who started out on this course, but now I'm changing it as time has gone by. In this picture, she's about 4 years old. Keep going. Daisy was a very aggressive little monster. Whoever thinks female sulcatas are not aggressive, well, there's exceptions from time to time. Here she is chasing one of my adult females. I don't know what she thought she was going to do. The big male in this enclosure finally put her in her place. But next one. There he is, putting her in her place. He came up, she came up to his face and got in his face and tried to charge at him. And he said, what? Shoved her back, turned around, did this, and she never was aggressive again after this point. I made sure he wasn't hurt her, and he was fine. And I knew she was female for sure at this point. She was 4 years old. It was obvious. Next picture. Here she is getting a little older. This is her at about 5 years. Again, you can see the original bad stuff, and you can see how it's coming in much smoother now. Keep going. Here's another picture. This is 5.5, 6 years old. I have these little knobbies on the top, but the rest of her is getting smoother and smoother. Keep going. There we are. There's some grass and weeds and stuff. That's what they eat every day. Keep going. There's a nice profile picture. You can see the flat valleys in between the peaks. That flat valley, I'm very proud of it. It was a long time coming, and took a lot to figure that out. There's one of my little low-growing mulberry trees, fake mulberry leaves that they can reach. Keep going. Okay, now we move into the next phase. So Daisy was my guinea pig. She's the one I tested all these theories on. I escalated the level of humidity and hydration higher and higher and higher and higher, and lo and behold, the sky didn't fall. She didn't get a respiratory infection. She didn't get shell rot. And in fact, her growth started looking better and better and better as time went on. So now I wanted to start with, instead of preventing pyramiding, or instead of stopping pyramiding in progress, I want to prevent pyramiding before it begins. So I finally got my adults old enough. I told you at 14 years old, they were like 60 pounds. Finally started getting eggs. So here is little Dolores laying her second clutch of eggs in her lifetime. And there's little Ava. Ava, come here. Oh. Ava wanted everybody to, this is my daughter Ava. She's my tortoise helper. She helps me find the eggs. Okay, now listen. So this is Ava observing nature taking its course. Well, it's sort of, in a way. Go ahead, next slide. There we are again. Just to prove where these babies came from. Keep going. We can go through these pretty quick. It was her second clutch, her first clutch, because she grew so slowly. Again, the proponents of feed them very little, feed them only dry stuff, grow them very slowly. This is the result I got from this. Her first clutch was the year before. It had 3 eggs, none were fertile. This year I got 7 eggs. That's a tiny clutch for sulcatas, for those of you who know sulcatas. I'm sure most of us are aware. I got 7 eggs, 3 of them hatched. I don't know which 3 it was, but 3 of these eggs hatched. Keep going. There we are pimping. This was a milestone for me. This was 2010. First time I personally bred, incubated, and hatched my own sulcatas. It was a long time in coming. Keep going. There we are. This would be Tuck. There were 3 that hatched. I had Tuli, Tuck, and Trey. Tuli I gave away to a lady who bought a tortoise and it died, a little baby, and I felt bad for her, so I said I should have kept Tuli. Anyway, I didn't. I kept Tuck and Trey. Keep going. There we are hatching. You can see the yolk sac there. This is how new this baby is. So here's a perfect little baby. No growth lines yet. This is what it hatched with. And keep going. You can see the egg tooth is still there. Little tiny babies. Keep going. There's about a week or 2 old in comparison to daddy. I soak my big ones every once in a while too in the summertime. Keep going. So you can see the earliest growth lines starting to come in, coming in smooth. There's not a big notch there. Keep going. There's profile pic. This picture is about a month old now. Got a little bit of growth. You can see a few growth lines in there, but still looking nice and smooth. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. You get the idea. This is what the wild ones that I've seen look like, and I haven't seen a lot of wild ones. Very little is known about the wild ones. I don't know if you guys know this. Most of you probably do. The wild sulcata is almost extinct. It's going extinct. It's extinct in at least 2 countries. My friend Tomas from Senegal, Africa, he can't get into the other countries to find out how they're doing because he'll get killed if he tries to do it. In his own country of Senegal, there were 40 left in the wild. 40 sulcatas left in the wild. That was it. He has since that time put back about 180. And it might be more than that now. This was a couple of years ago. He put back about 180. So now there's 180 plus the original 40. So anyway, I showed him some of these pictures, and he says, yeah, that's what the wild ones look like. So I'm getting closer. Keep going. Not perfect, but good. Keep going. Keep going. I love the wet pictures. Keep going. Here's Tuck and Trey together. Now, in these enclosures, the way I was raising these babies, they still had an open top. I had it mostly covered, and I did the spraying, and I did the shell spraying. These babies were soaked every day for about the first 6 months or so, and then I start skipping a day here and there, and I gradually taper off. By the time they're a couple of years old, I soak them twice a week if they need it, depending on the weather. Keep going. There's a nice profile shot. This is now about 6 months old. Keep going. There's the 2 of them together. Keep going. There's a rare dry photo. Keep going. Now, you can see in this picture, I don't want to walk through you. You can see just a little bit of pumping there, a little bit of a raise. Not perfect, but it's pretty darn good, and I'm certainly proud of it. There's nothing to scoff at. Keep going. Keep going. There's another nice profile shot. Keep going. Keep going. There we are. Now we are about, hey, that's me. This now is, do you remember, it's about 2 years old, right? That's about 2 years old. You can see a little lump there, but not bad. And this is a female. This turned out to be Trey, who I found out later was a female. Keep going. Here they are again. You can see a little bit more on Tuck, a little bit less on Trey. Keep going. Keep going. Next one. Next one. This now is about 3 years old. Still pretty darn good, but not perfect. We were talking earlier about that slope back. This is typical of the Mali tortoises, the ones that were imported from Mali. They have this kind of sloped back here, as opposed to one other locality is the Sudan tortoises that tend to get bigger and they're much rounder, like a perfectly round carcass. They don't have this little slope in the back. Some people, sometimes they see this slope and they think it's metabolic bone disease. It's not, it's a Mali tortoise. Keep going. Here are my Sudan ones. So these were hatched May 2012. Now I've really got the system down. The open tops aren't working for me very well. I can't maintain the level of humidity that I want to maintain because it's so dry where I am. So even though the top's covered, I'm spraying them, I'm keeping it damp in there, I'm doing everything I can. The humidity just goes up and out into the room. Yes, sir.
Percentages. What kind of humidity you think is that?
My open top enclosures on a good day at around tortoise level, I was getting 50 to 60% humidity. And it was doing good work, but tuck and tray weren't as perfect as I wanted them to be. I wanted them to look like a wild one, and the wild ones I don't see that little bit of lumpiness. So now I've moved on to, this is a closed chamber. There's a bigger picture of it coming up. These are my Sudans, and I put them in this closed chamber. I think the closed chamber picture comes up a little later when we get enclosures. But it's completely enclosed. The front has plexiglass that slides closed. There's no vents or anything. I'm trying to maintain humidity in these chambers at about 80%. You can see now I've got a relatively dry substrate. It's dry on top, but the lower down layers are kind of damp. So this is another page that I borrowed from the redfoot keepers. Redfoots are prone to shell rot, and so you can't have them on a wet substrate all the time or they tend to get the fungal infections. So I wanted a drier substrate, just because I wanted to, but I needed to maintain high humidity. So this is where I came up with the concept of using the closed chamber. Now I can maintain 80% humidity all the time with very little effort at all. Again, no respiratory infections, no shell rot, no problems of any kind. In fact, just the opposite. I did an experiment where I took I got a regular size clutch of 24, 25 eggs. I took 6 babies and hatched them and from the same clutch, 6 babies in the closed chamber and 6 babies that I raised primarily outdoors, almost every day. I had a heavily planted, very green 4 foot by 8 foot enclosure. I used a 4 foot by 8 foot indoor closed chamber for the other 6, and I raised them at the same time from the same clutch. I fed them the same amount of the same food every day. They all got soaked every day. The outdoor babies would be brought in every night. We have cold nights out there. I think you guys have cold nights here too. At night I would bring those outdoor babies in and they would sleep in one of these closed chambers. But then during the day they would be out all day long. Heavily, a lot of cover. They were under it. I would water it, keep it as damp and humid as I could. The indoor babies on the same amount of the same food grew 2 to 3 times faster than the outdoor babies. So this is another tenet that I'd like to challenge is tortoises do better outdoors. I think adults do better outdoors, and in some cases they do better outdoors. I think babies do benefit from sunshine. I put them out for about an hour or 2 a day, and then I bring them back into their controlled, warm, human chambers. So we also hear that slow growth is better and fast growth is bad. I wasn't intending to grow any of them fast. I had no idea that this would happen. When I started using these closed chambers, the growth rate skyrocketed. I was feeding them the same food in the same amount. Nothing changed except they were now in a closed chamber instead of an open top chamber. So again, as long as the nutritional needs are met, calcium levels are adequate, and you're adequate calcium in the diet, and they're getting UV from some source, whether it be sunshine in my case, or UV bulbs if people live in the frozen north or whatever. I'm not seeing any growth anomalies, any growth problems or anything. So keep on going with these Sudans. These guys turned out, oh, there's a squash leaf. I grow pumpkins too. Keep going. Here's one of the outdoor enclosures. You can see a little baby over there. The one that I did my experiment on that I was speaking of was twice as dense as this as far as the level of plants that were in it. Keep going. There's my Sudans again. Keep going. Keep on going. Just scroll through. There they are in their big outdoor enclosure. Keep going. You can see the smoothness that I'm producing now. These guys would come outside when they were babies for about an hour or 2 a day. They'd get soaked on the way back in, so they stay nice and hydrated. And then they would live primarily 23 hours a day. They would be in their closed chambers. And then some days I wouldn't be able to take them out at all, because in the winter, occasionally we have a cold day, even here in Southern California. But on those days, I would just leave them in. Keep on going. Keep on going. You can see in profile, this is, I don't know how you get smooth in that. That's cue ball smooth right there. Keep going. And keep going. Just scroll through. There we go. Now they're a little older. I've got the same smoothness. They're outside and they're dry. At this size, they're about 6 to 8 inches here. I leave them outside most of the day. I put them out in the morning once it warms up, 9, 10 o'clock. I leave them out until 5, 6 o'clock at night in the summertime. Keep going. This is the result of a closed chamber during the day, a little bit of sunshine with their babies, a little more sunshine as they get older. The pen that they're in there is about 40, 45 feet long, and it's kind of an odd shape. It's 15 feet at the widest point and 3 feet at the tip of the triangle point. Keep going. So we've heard all about sulcatas and how this works for sulcatas. Before I start with the leopard tortoises, let me go into a little bit more about sulcatas. I think we've been given the wrong information about sulcatas and where they come from. Every book you read and every expert you talk to and every vet that read the same books that you were reading, they'll all tell you sulcatas come from an area of the world where it's very dry and very arid and there's not a lot of food and this and that and the other thing. In actuality, it is dry 6 feet above ground where these weather stations are for 8 or 9 months of every year. Why don't the books ever mention the other 3 or 4 months? Anybody want to guess what's happening the other 3 or 4 months?
Rain.
Monsoon season. Anybody ever been to like Southeast Asia? Well, New Orleans, South Florida. We know what these conditions are like. This is what it's like when sulcatas are hatching. Some of you may know about the experiments that have been done with eggs hatching. Eggs are underground, the eggs hatch, they stay down there, they eat the eggshells, they eat mom's poop to get their guts seeded. They stay underground in these chambers for an indeterminate amount of time. What makes them hatch? Some studies are suggesting that rain makes them hatch. The rain comes down, hits the ground over their nest chamber. The rainwater molecules plug the little spaces between the individual grains of sand and dirt. They can't breathe anymore. They're like, hey, we gotta get out. They dig and they come up. So sulcatas are hatching in a rainstorm. The day they come up, their carapace gets wet. There's puddles everywhere. A lot of the areas where this is happening is marshy. This information, by the way, is coming from my friend Tomas, who lives in Senegal and has been studying tortoises. He's the founder of the African Chelonian Institute, which is studying and research and repatriation of some of these endangered species. In any case, this is who's telling me. This is a guy that lives in Africa. He says, if you want to see a baby sulcata, you have to be there before the rainy season starts. He said 2 weeks after the first rain, the weeds are yay high and so thick you can't walk through them. There could be 100 sulcata babies and you won't see one. In my experience, my sulcata babies will not go underground. If there's a gopher hole, if there's a burrow that I made for them, I put them in the hole, they just run back out. They don't want to have anything to do with the hole in the ground until they get a little older and a little bigger. So sulcata babies are not going underground. They're staying above ground, but they're hiding in dense, thick vegetation. And it's raining frequently during this monsoon season. Humidity in the natural range out there is 80 to 100%, depending on how hot it is and how rainy it is. So this is what I'm trying to simulate, and this is why I've gone in this direction. What I was doing with the dry routine was failing. We studied the environment there. We say it's dry, it's arid, and this is what you work. It didn't work. So I started trying to figure it out. This is what I've now discovered. And Thomas, my friend from Africa, has confirmed some of what the books just don't tell you. The other thing is sulcatas, according to The Crying Tortoise, which is a book on sulcatas, is out of print now. Sulcatas spend 95 to 98% of their lives underground. So who cares how hot and dry it is above ground? That tortoise isn't in that air. The tortoise is underground in a burrow. I built the one that you saw where Daisy was living, that underground little chamber. That was my prototype. I since built a 4 foot by 4 foot by 2 foot one, dug a 3 foot hole, buried it. It's got an access hatch, an 8 foot tunnel that goes down to it. In my 3 foot deep underground burrow, it can be 110 degrees every day for 10 days. It can be a 65 degree night. All summer long, the temperature in that burrow stays between 79 and 81. It doesn't fluctuate more than 2 degrees. That's only 3 feet deep. And we know in the wild, sulcata burrows go 12, 18, 30 feet deep sometimes. So, yes, it's hot and dry for part of the year in sulcata territory, but they don't experience hot and dry conditions because they're in the damp underground burrows where they're pooping and peeing. Another thing he told me is they drag vegetation at the end of the rainy season. They use their shoulders and their bellow scoots, and he made a motion like this. They drag vegetation underground into those burrows for them to eat during the dry season. Another little factoid about, hey, they come from a desert. They're not a desert animal. They're a grassland tortoise. It takes a substantial amount of annual rainfall every year to sustain a grassland and trees and forests, which they live on the edges of. So just food for thought. I wanted to know now, will this work with other species? Leopard tortoises are not so cut and dry. Sulcatas come from that homogeneous band pretty much across the northern portion of Africa, above the middle. So it's pretty easy to say, well, yeah, it's hot and dry, and then it's monsoon season. Leopards come from the entire continent. You got them up in Ethiopia in the north. You got them down on the Cape. I've been to South Africa. I've seen them running around in the scrub brush down there on the Cape. Conditions down there like San Francisco. It's cold and clammy most of the time. It was 50 degrees. I'm walking around in a down jacket, 40-mile-an-hour winds, and here come these adult South African leopard tortoises trucking along, walking through the scrub brush like nothing's wrong. I'm going, wait a minute, you're supposed to be asleep right now. It's way too cold. And it didn't seem to bother them. So I wanted to know if this would work with other species. The sulcata showed no sign of shell rot, no sign of respiratory infection, so I said, well, South African leopard tortoises. Go on. I bought, all total this first year, this was 210, I bought a total of 36. I think there's 24 in this tub. So you can see the substrate's very damp. I was doing my closed chambers as much as I could. Keep going. Here they are putting on a little size, pretty little guys. Nice and smooth, keep going. Go ahead, keep scrolling through. Just some pictures of the age. Go back to that one. Go back one. You can see the new growth coming in here. So they're putting on size. This is evidence that they're growing. And you can see on every one of these, there's not a lump to be found. Next picture. There's their little outdoor sunning enclosure. Same thing I did with these guys. An hour or so when they're tiny hatchlings, as they put on size, they get 3-4 inches. They stay out 2, 3, 4 hours, and continually more and more. Ask me later, sweet pie. Keep going. Keep on going. Here we are putting on some significant size. Not perfect, but looking pretty good. Again, these guys are, they're in my reptile room, so it's very dry, and it's semi-open enclosure. It's not fully closed chambers yet. Keep going. Here's one of their outdoor pens I made for them. This was in the sulcata pen, and that's why it's bare dirt. I moved this wall back that many feet to give them an open area to walk around in. You can see a few of them hiding around down here. They're still little there. Go ahead. Keep going. Put on more size. There's a nice profile shot. Some of them get this light color. Nobody can tell me, well, I haven't been able to figure out why some of them stay light like this and some of them are more mottled, but I find it interesting. Keep going. Mind you, all these guys are raised in the same enclosure on the same diet, so it's not a dietary thing. Sit up. Come on. Here is the closed chamber that I have these guys housed in. You see the shelf up here? I built this thing for a water monitor lizard years ago. I repurposed it to use it as a tortoise enclosure. So I have a ceramic heating element here, basking bulb here and here, and in this corner over here you can see there's another ceramic heating element. The ceramic heating elements are on a thermostat set to 80 degrees. I never let the temperature drop below 80 degrees. 78, but I keep it at 80. They have their basking lights. I use very low wattage. They're 65 watt flood bulbs. So there is warmer under there, but not a whole lot warmer. I'm not trying to cook the top of their shells. We now know that incandescent bulbs give out a lot of IRA, infrared A, and it's extremely desiccating to the tops of their carapaces. So I'm also doing some more experiments this year, trying to figure out how to grow them and give them temperature gradient without having hot bulbs drying out the carapace, because the carapace drying is a big contributor to this pyramiding, and I'm trying to solve and get rid of. So this is how these guys are housed. You can see the track here. This is aluminum track. The plexiglass doors slide shut, so this whole thing is closed. There is no ventilation. I open the door a couple of times a day for food, water, and check them or whatever, and that's all the airflow that they get. It's not airtight around the doors. There's a big gap between the two doors, so some air movement is happening, but not very much. Again, with very little effort at all, it's easy to maintain 70, 80, 90% humidity in these enclosures all the time. Keep going. Here we are putting on some size. That's pretty smooth, looking good. Keep going. Keep on going. I'll tell you when to stop. Oh, there's my little girl. She's not a ham at all. Hold on 1 second. Who here has heard that high incubation temperatures will give us primarily females, depending on what the temperatures are and all of that stuff. Frequently, when you have higher elevated incubation temperatures, you get split scoots. So here you can see some definite split scoots on this guy. That's an abnormality, so I'm thinking, well, it must have been a higher incubation temperature. I'm going to have a female on my hands. This is a male. He was my biggest, fastest growing male. He's all male. Sometimes split scoots are not female, just in case that was anybody was curious. Keep on going. Here we are in their outdoor pen. Keep going. There's some of them lined up. You can still see it's fairly smooth there. I love this dappled light picture. Keep going. This is a 1.5 years old. These males, they're not like normal leopards. The South Africans, these are true South Africans, directly out of the South African stock. And the males are ready to go at 1.5 years, and the females are not. So now I have the males and females separated. When we saw this was 2010, so they're 4 years old now. I've got my females living by themselves, and the males are all separated. They are worse than sulcatas. They're worse than any Russian I've seen. These males, they just battle and fight, and you can't keep the males together. I can, not my enclosures. Keep going. All of these tortoises, by the way, by the time they get about 8 to 10 inches, I move them outside full time, which will bring me to another problem. Keep going. Here are these guys at about a year and a half, 2 years old. They're just getting ready to move outside now. Keep going. Keep on going. I'm just giving you, this is a cross-section of all the guys that I kept. You can see how nicely they have turned out. Again, if there was something unhealthy about 80% humidity and daily soaks, they wouldn't gain this much size in this short time eating weeds and grass. That's all they eat is weeds and grass. Occasional Missouri just to make sure they're getting all the vitamins they need. I do put a little calcium supplement once or twice a week, a little bit of powder. But I'm getting this size on that diet. Something about the higher humidity and the higher level of hydration allows their cells to just grow faster and thrive. I don't want to grow fast tortoises. I'm not trying to grow them fast. I'm just not intentionally starving them to slow them down on purpose. I just feed them a moderate diet, very high fiber, very natural. I feed a lot of mulberry leaves, cactus, grapevine leaves, that kind of thing I feed all summer long. Yard clippings for my grass, I grow especially for them. Whatever weeds I can scrounge up, that's what I feed them primarily in the summertime. In the wintertime, all the stuff in their pen grows. I get a lot of mallow, a lot of fillery, hawksbit, a lot of wild mustard comes late in the season, and they primarily just graze on their own throughout our winter months here in Southern California. So that's the diet they're on, and this is a 2.5-year-old animal that's 8 inches long. So again, there's something very healthy about all this hydration. Keep going. That's a good picture. Next one. Oh, now I'm on to enclosures. This is what I started with Thule, Chuck, and Trey. No, Thule was late to the party. These two hatched. The third one took about a week and a half. Actually, Trey was the last one. She took about 2 weeks later. The other ones hatched, so there's just 2 in it. But I've got a humid hide over here. I've got damp substrate, nice little shallow water bowl, and the top is a screen top, and I'm trying to humidify the room. Can you see the numbers on the? No, can't see it. Go ahead, next one. This was another attempt I did. I completely covered over the top. In this enclosure, I had a 18 by 18 inch cane heat mat. So rather than give them overhead heat from the bowl, I was trying to just completely close the chamber in. This is before I moved to my bigger ones. These are just some of the evolution of the process, the evolution of my experiments with them. Keep going. There you go. There's the cane heat mat that was inside that one. So normally that top is kept down so it stays very, very humid in there. So this is a lesson kind of in itself. I went to the extreme with some of these guys. I wanted to see what would happen. I wanted to see how true what the books had to say were. So you guys don't have to go so extreme. We know that at 100% humidity all day long with no drying spot, they don't get sick. They do perfectly fine as long as the temperatures stay where they're supposed to be. So at more moderate humidity levels like 60, 70, 80%, you can definitely expect to not see any problems with it. Keep on going. Oh, and somebody suggested, noteworthy I think, one of the reasons I'm having success with this is because my tortoises get outside in the dry air for an hour or 2 each day, and that does give them a chance to dry out. I don't know if that's the case or not, because over winter, I would go 3 or 4 weeks sometimes without a single day outside, and still I had no problem. But it's something, it's a bit of information that was thrown out there for everybody to consider. This is another one of my outdoor sunning enclosures for babies. I like to have covers just in case, birds and whatever. Go ahead. These I made up. I planted them with all sorts of grasses and weeds and seeds and all kinds of cool stuff in there. This is when I first built these enclosures. I had the palm fronds over for some shade. These things got so dense that the plants were growing up through the stuff. I had a heck of a time finding the tortoises when they were so dense. That taught me that when I plant things, I need to leave channels that are open for them to move around and so they're not so hard to find. But this was another way that I found that was good as summer. Keep going. Next one. This is Daisy's enclosure that I made for her that now the Sudans are living in there, but they're too big. This is the one I was telling you about where I made a 4 foot by 4 foot by 2 foot tall box. I dug a big giant hole, sunk it in the ground, built a big entrance ramp. There's a cover over, I think it's in the next picture. Next picture. Oh, here's the box itself. Keep going. There's the box in the ground. I've got 2 by 4 framing. The lid goes on top. I sealed it with silicone all around the edge so no water can get in there. The access hatch will be right here. Keep going. There's my electrical. I got a thermostat down there. In the winter time, I was telling you my enclosure stays 80 degrees. all summer long with no electricity, no temperature regulation at all. In the wintertime, it gradually drops down to about 49, 50, 51, and it stays at 50 all winter long with no heat or anything in it. Obviously, that's not okay for a sulcata, but I had some hibernating species. I had actually black and white tegus that I had built in the same sort of underground enclosures, and it was awesome. I needed no electricity whatsoever. In the summertime, they were up and about doing their thing. In the wintertime, they would go down on those blocks. I never had to worry about rain or freezing nights or anything else. They would hibernate the winter away, come back up in the springtime and start resuming normal activity. I kept things that way for years and years, and it worked great. But what it showed me is, underground, the temperature is very, very stable and very, very consistent throughout the year. Heats up to 80 in the summer, stays 80 all summer. It doesn't matter how hot or how cool. We could have cooler days in the summertime, and it would still stay at 80 degrees. Well, it was the same thing in winter. It would stay 50. So I had a heck of a time heating these underground boxes in winter because the ground just sucks the heat out of your box. So anyway, I had a thermostat and heat down there. Again, I had it set at 80 to keep it warm enough down there underground for them to keep going. There's an idea to give you the depth. This is their little entrance tunnel. Goes down, and there's the box, and there's my access hatch. 4 problems with underground burrows. This is true of the California desert tortoises too. 4 problems that I found. Burrows can collapse, the burrows can flood. For a sulcata, it's too cold down there, there's no temperature regulation. And the 4th problem, you have no access to your tortoise when it's in that burrow. Good luck getting any tortoise, even a small California desert tortoise. Reach in that burrow and see if you can pull them out. You can't get them out. So I wanted them to have the benefits of the underground burrow where they could have consistent temperatures and consistent conditions, but I wanted to have access to them. I wanted to make sure it couldn't collapse or flood, and I wanted the temperature to be warm enough at all times. So this is what I concocted, and it works very well for me. Keep going. There's the tunnel going down. There's me in there sealing it up and putting everything together. Keep going. There is the rain cover built over the tunnel entrance. There's the access hatch to get down to them. I made a shake table. I since moved that shake table, but it was just some fun. This is the hottest part of the ranch right here. There's a wall that you can't see over here. That's south facing, and that's, look, the sun comes in the winter time, and it hits this wall and reflects, and it makes an 85-degree warm area on a 60 or 55-degree day right there. It's really a cool spot. But in the summertime, that spot is just cooking. So they can get underground to get away from that heat just like they would in the wild. So they move into these outdoor pens when they're around 8 to 10 inches, depending on the time of year. I like to move them out in late spring, let them acclimate over summertime. And then when fall comes, they're already using their boxes, or their underground box in this case, and that way they can just stay outside all winter. Next one. There's another overview of it. There's Daisy in the background. So this is where she goes in. When it rains, the rain comes down the hill, goes to that wall and out the side. Doesn't go down her tunnel. There's the access hatch. You just see the edge of the access hatch there. So if I need to get to her, take the access hatch out. It's insulated on the inside with foil back insulation. Take the inside hatch out and I can get down to her. Keep going. Here's one of my above ground boxes. I mentioned earlier that I had a problem. I raise these guys and I start them in these enclosed chambers inside, high humidity, and they grow nice and smooth and everything's great. Well, guess what? At some point they're too big and they gotta move outside. As soon as I move them outside, that fast growth that I was getting inside stops. They stop growing for nearly a year. They get all notchy, the growth looks terrible. It's dry where I live, it's extremely dry. So now I'm in the testing phases of trying to figure out what to do with them once it's time to move them outside. This is what I've come up with, and it's working well so far. Damage was done initially, but now I think I'm reversing that damage. I built these boxes. They're highly insulated. I got an oil heater in here on a thermostat. I've got the vinyl cover over the door, and then the door flap goes up at night. These are very efficient. These things, on a below freezing night, use 18 cents of electricity to keep them at 80 degrees all night long outside. It's beautiful. They've got weather stripping around the top. You can kind of see here in the picture. I made shelves inside, and on the shelves, I put these little tubs of water. That gives me enough humidity. It's just moderate humidity, 50 to 60% or so, inside their boxes. They come out of the box, run around, eat weeds, do whatever they do out during the day, and the humidity there is 8%, 10% most of the summer. And then at night, or whenever they feel like it, they can go back into their boxes, and it's moderately humid inside their boxes. And this seems to help them, once they reach a little larger size, to continue growing smooth and not get the rough spots from the dry air. Keep on going. Here are the leopards enjoying some straw or some grass hay in there. I think that's Bermuda hay. Keep going. Oh, back up one.
What's on the left?
That is my temperature probe, so I always know the temperature in there.
Oh,
This,
that, yeah.
that is a mini radiant oil-filled heater. You can buy these at Walmart for about $25 $30. I built a little wall around it. I started using these because a friend of mine had a Galapagos tortoise. He had it in a 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot cube. Plain plywood, no insulation, nothing. He had a full-size one of these in there, touching the wood, 2 inches from the top, and a tortoise would sleep up against it. And I'm going, what are you doing? It didn't hurt his tortoise. He put a camera in there, and he would watch his tortoise sleeping at night on the internet. He was the first guy that I saw do this. We could be anywhere. You pull out a laptop and go online, and you could look at his tortoise in the night box at 10 o'clock at night sleeping. And his tortoise would literally be touching this thing. He didn't have it covered and protected, and it was touching the wood, and it never started a fire. Well, I'm not doing it that way, but that's, again, here's a worst case scenario when it worked okay. So what I've done is I keep it 3 to 4 inches from anything that it could possibly touch. I use metal chain and I screw it down. So this thing, even in an earthquake, you could turn this box upside down, the heater will not move. It's screwed to the floor and it cannot move. And then I have, go back one. I have that over it. It's a metal heat shield. It's 18 by 24 inches. It's a little sheet metal you can buy it on here. I don't think I need that because I have about 8 to 10 inches, 12 inches of clearance between the top. Like I said, my buddy had the full-size one on high, 1,500 watts, 3 inches, 2 inches from the top of his, and it never did anything. And this was year after year he did this. It wasn't just one night. It was all the time he did it this way. So I didn't really need that, but I wanted to put it just to be extra safe. So this is a mini oil heater. It's a smaller size one. I only run them on low, which is about 250 watts. At 250 watts, it does the job just fine. These things click on 2 or 3 times on a cold night, and that's it. Because the box is so well insulated, none of the heat escapes. So they heat up, they get warm enough, the thermostat kicks off, but because of the properties of this type of heater, it stays hot for a long time and it keeps giving off heat as the outside air is trying to cool it. So they only kick on 2 or 3 times a night. It's really quite nice. Keep on going. Thank you very much. There is the box. This is a 4 foot by 8 foot box in one of my enclosures. Keep going. Made it through it all. I think I hit most of my high points. I think I hit most of my controversial, hey, this is what I've heard and this is what's working for me. I'm perfectly open. Any questions? A lot of what I've told you tonight goes against the conventional wisdom. I'll get to it in just 1 second. You're first. I've tried this on. I have a, how do I say this diplomatically? The advice that's given for raising California desert tortoises has, in my experience, been very detrimental to the species. Let me ask you guys, who does the licensing here for California desert tortoises? Somebody does. You know the permits that you need to keep California? At what age are you willing to give me my permit for my desert tortoise? Most of the time when I ask, they tell me, well, wait till it's 2 or 3 years because a lot of them don't survive.
Right.
But generally, am I right? Is that what
Yes.
conventional wisdom is? Just wait a little longer, some of them don't survive. When I get them as hatchlings, and I start them using the same methods that I just showed you, with daily soaks, limited time outside, but most of the time indoors on a damp substrate, offering a humid hide. I do keep the top open, so it's moderate humidity, not high humidity. I do the same thing with Russian tortoises and Pyramiding. All of those species I do the same way. None of my babies die. I have a 100% success rate. No shell rot, they grow very nicely, they grow smoothly, and they all thrive and grow. So I think that the conventional wisdom in how we're doing all tortoises, but especially the California desert tortoises, maybe there's a middle ground. You don't have to go as extreme as mine, but maybe we soak them more than once a week. Maybe we do offer a humid hide instead of all dry all the time. Outdoors all the time, I have found for any species, is not good for them. Not for babies. For older ones, yes. For babies, it's really hard on them. The outdoor conditions are so extreme, so variable, they seem to do much better, all species, for me, if I keep them primarily indoors when they're tiny hatchlings. As they gain size, I put them out more and more and more in well-designed enclosures with shade, underground shelters, things like that. Russian tortoises, for example, I was shocked. I made them the same kind of little underground hideaway to get out and eat if they wanted to. I did the same thing for my sulcatas for years. Sulcatas won't touch it. Russians, as soon as they saw it, boom, they dove in those holes. It was kind of interesting. Okay. Yes?
I also know some of the answers to the questions.
Oh, gosh. Let me get to your second. She had her hand up. Yes, ma'am.
How many and how big are the tortoises that you have in that house? People in here. How many
It's an ever-changing number. When they were juveniles, I had 14, and then I found out I had mostly males, so I started whittling down. I got down to about 9. Then I realized I had, this was one of my mistakes. I kept the biggest, nicest-looking leopards out of that group. Well, males grow faster, so I ended up with mostly males. I had 7 out of 9 males. So now I keep separating them out, separating. As the males got older, I couldn't keep them together, and I couldn't keep them with the females, so the males all got separated. So at the most, I had 14 juveniles living in that 4-foot by 8-foot box, but it whittled down to 10, and then 9, and then once the males really started doing their thing, I had to separate them out. So now I have 4 females, 2 males, another male separated. Those 2 males are going to have to be separated now in springtime's coming back. They get less intense over the winter, but now they're going to have to be separated out. So the big 4-foot by 8-foot boxes, I use that for multiples. Like I have my female sulcata tortoises. I don't breed the sulcatas except when I need a batch of eggs to do an experiment with. My females, and sulcatas don't store the sperm like other species do. The fertility goes down clutch after clutch after clutch within about 6 months. Whereas a leopard tortoise, I know of leopard tortoises that have not seen a male for 5 years and they still produce fertile eggs. Sulcatas don't do that, just for your own information. So it varies. I have 3 adult females living in one of those boxes that size right now. If I have a single male or a single tortoise, I usually build a 4-foot by 4-foot box, and I heat those a little bit differently. I use radiant heat panels overhead and the cane heat mats on the bottom for the 4-foot by 8-foot or 4-foot by 4-foot boxes. Now,
Yeah, actually, in mine sticks, I got 2 wild tortoises. One was 18 pounds, one was 22 pounds. The 18-pound one is a little slightly bigger.
sulcata?
Yes, I got it. My 20, I suppose that was the neighborhood. So the 22-pound one, I still have it. I don't think anything like you do, to be able to see him, he's old and slim. He's
Wild
about
caught.
90 pounds.
So he must have been 5, 6 years old when you got him, 6, 7 years old when you got him?
Well, I don't know, he's 22 pounds of wild horse, I have no idea about that.
That wild caught foundation, you could see in my adult males at the very beginning of the presentation, they were looking smoother and smoother as time went by. They reach a certain size, and with sulcatas, I think it's around 14, 16 inches, where even though they're in the dry air, they start to kind of smooth out on their own. That does happen.
With the one with love horse, just like the yellow one is pretty smooth, and I don't know anything.
It happens occasionally. I have a tortoise that was given to me. It was a lady in Orange County. She bought 2. She bought a pair. The male reached maturity and wouldn't leave the female alone. She had to separate them. She gave me the female. The male was significantly pyramided. Not terrible, but he had some pyramiding. The female raised in the same backyard, in the same environment. She grew very slowly for the first 3, 4 years, she said. And then in the last couple of years, she had sprouted and caught up to the same size as the male. When she separated, that female was very smooth, and she hadn't done anything different than the norm either. So there are questions that are not answered. Here's my next question. I'm raising a batch of 10 Burmese stars right now. I got them as hatchlings. They all were no more than a couple of months old when I got them. In that same closed chamber that the leopards were started in, I took the leopards outside. They live outside now. I sterilized the chamber. I ammonia treated it, did everything else. Months went by. I got my Burmese star babies. So I've got 10 of them. They're all in the same enclosure, eating the same food, the same soaking routine, the same everything. I have one that's a little bit lumpy, not bad, but he's a little bit lumpy. And then I have 3 or 4 that are just perfectly smooth, and the rest are in between. So I can't answer the question, why in the same conditions, on the same diet, the same upbringing, the same everything, why do some still grow a little pyramided and some are perfect? There's unanswered questions that we still have. I'm just sharing what I've found to date. I'm still, this is,
No humidity, just outside.
it happens sometimes. Robin, you have a sulcata from a good friend of mine, Dave Friend. I love Dave, he's a great guy. The size that yours is now at 4 years old, my human chamber guys, they reach that size in about 6 months. And I'm not trying to grow them fast. I don't think fast growth is good. I'm not promoting fast growth. I'm just saying that if you start them dry and have cooler nights and all that stuff, they do grow slower. But I tried to grow them slow and still ended up pyramiding because things were so dry. So something about the humidity allows their carapace to be flexible enough that the bone can grow smoothly under it. Does everyone here know what the pyramiding consists of? Those pyramids are actually a thin layer of keratin over bone that's sticking up. The bone becomes porous and it forms those pyramids, and it's just a thin little layer of keratin over those bones. That's what those pyramids are. So it's actually, when you have a pyramided tortoise, it's actually bone deformity underneath the thin layer of keratin. Yes, sir, you have a question.
Why do
too dry, they tend to go that way. Yes, ma'am. In the back. That's something coming from your substrate. I haven't had that happen. If there's mushroom spores in your substrate and you have a dam like that, you can't grow mushrooms. I don't use that. I use for sulcatas, my substrate of choice is orchid bark. And I buy it in bulk at the garden centers, the big $6 huge bags of it. The pet store stuff is ridiculous. You spend $10 per tiny little bag. I've never had that problem with the orchid bark. The other one that I'll use that I prefer for Russians and for other testudo and for California desert tortoises, I prefer to use cocoa coir, the fine grade ground up coconut husk, and I've never had that problem with that substrate either. Those are the two that I've had the best results with, and that's primarily what I use. And it's been a thing lately. I see a lot of people wanting to use mixtures of things. I guess it's not harmful, but I don't see any reason for it. I've never done it that way, but if people like it, it's okay. Yes, sir.
I noticed in your pictures and everything,
Yep.
that you have thermostat temperature devices on your table.
Yes.
And you have one that you can move.
Yes.
A little background. I spent some time in the Louisiana and in Senegal, and I hate it because
I want to talk to you. Tell me about the weather.
I've also noticed that you said there was a big difference between your outdoor enclosure and your indoor enclosure.
Yes.
Your outdoor enclosure is changing temperature between day and night.
Yep.
How much attention have you been taking in tracking with temperature like you are humidity?
In those enclosures, you can see one, but there's usually 2 or 3, and those little boxes are remote probes, so I move them around. I put them in the middle hives, I put them all around. So I'm tracking temperatures throughout my enclosure. My goal in my closed chambers is to maintain the entire thing at a minimum of 80 day and night. During the day, when the heat lights come on and the fluorescent bulbs come on for lighting and all that, the temperature tends to climb. In the wintertime, it'll climb up to 86, 87. In the summertime, during the hot days, it'll climb up to 90, 92. Overall ambient is 92, which for, the Sudan and Senegal, out in the desert, not near the coast, not in Dakar, but away from the coast, you know how hot it gets in Senegal. So 92, that's a mild day for them. So I let the temperature,
It always gets cold.
at night it drops to 80 in my enclosures. And my speculation is, just like my underground enclosure, all summer long in Santa Clarita, we'll have 55, 60 degree nights. We'll have 90, 100 degree days. Temperature all summer long stays 80 in that burrow underground. And that's only 3 feet deep. So I speculate the same thing happens for the wild tortoises in Senegal. Yes, you have your cool nights, but those hot days, they average each other out. And just a few feet underground, I'll bet you it's 80 degrees all the time or close to it. That's my speculation. You've been there. Did you climb down any sulcata burrows while you were there?
No.
That's what I want to do.
I was in the Air Force,
Yes.
and I spent almost all my time in various Sunday Air Force, and I did notice that it would be 115 degrees in the daytime.
Yes.
And so we shut all of our roads and that things on the airplane. And since we had to have a guard posted on the airplane, we would be out there every night. And it would be 35, 40 degrees, same night that it was 100 degrees.
And were you there during the rainy season?
I was
During monsoon season?
Center.
And how cold were the nights in the rainy season?
I got wet. But I didn't spend a lot of time. I didn't spend a lot of time in these places. I was in there for like 3 or 4 days, and then I go someplace else. So I traveled all around those places. I don't do
You've reminded me of a very good point that I did want to make. We have what we speculate happens in the wild, and this is true. I think the California desert tortoise has been studied more than any other species on the planet. I think we know more about their habitat and their temperatures and their humidities than we do anything else. There's all sorts of speculation. Very little is known about sulcatas in the wild. I've found very little in the literature. More is known about leopards, but even not much about them. So there's a lot of speculation and a lot of what we surmise happens for these guys in the wild. Like a lot of people come after me for this information because, well, I've been to Tanzania and it's always cold at night and it's warm during the day and there's all this stuff. So what happens in the wild happens in the wild. Whatever it is, whoever's right or wrong about it, that's great, that's good information. But that doesn't change. Here in North America, in our enclosures, is not the wild. Whatever's working out there in the wild obviously works. You can see how beautiful and healthy these wild tortoises are. They survive this way for millions of years. When we bring them into our North American homes and backyards and enclosures, things are different. So this is an example of what works in captivity versus what doesn't work in captivity, regardless of what's happening or not happening in the wild. It's a point of contention that a lot of guys come and want to talk about, well, in the wild this and in the wild that. You might be right, but trying to simulate what you think happens in the wild does not work in captivity, at least for some species some of the time. Am I accurate? Well, this is what I've attempted to do, and I've been urged by a lot of people to share what I've learned through these experiments. Yes, ma'am. Orchid bark. Yes. You can buy it at any of the big nurseries in bulk, and it's much cheaper. You can go to Petco. I think the brand name at Petco is Reptibark, and it's a little tiny bag for about $10. Or you can go to the garden center and get a huge bag of it, a 2 cubic foot bag of it for $6. But make sure you get the fine grade because they'll sell orchid bark that's the big honking chunks. You want the fine grade stuff. And that's my preference for sulcata hatchlings. From the day they hatch, the first enclosure they go into, I like the orchid bark. The cocoa choir is really nice, but it's somewhat messy. Sulcatas, as I was saying, they don't dig and they don't go into holes. They stay on the surface. So the orchid bark is less messy for the sulcatas. For California desert tortoises, well, I guess Arizona desert tortoises too, and Russians and even Hermani, they like to dig into the substrate. So I give them a good 3-4 inch layer of cocoa coir, the compressed cocoa, and that stuff you can buy at the garden center too in bulk. A big compressed brick of it is about $12 versus the little $10 brick that you buy at the pet store. It's the same stuff. Those guys, rather than keep the closed chamber 80% all the time, I leave an open top so there's moderate humidity at the surface. The Russians and the desert tortoises, they'll dig in. If they want to be humid, they'll make their own little microclimate. They dig in and make their own little snuggle chamber, and they just stay there until they're ready to come up. So in that way, they're able to regulate their own humidity. They can't do this if they're on dry dirt or dry sand or dry rabbit pellets. They can try to dig in, but first of all, it won't hold the shape so they can't burrow. And second of all, it's all dry everywhere, so they can't get any kind of carapace moisture going at all. Whereas in the damp substrates, they have the choice of they can stay on the surface near the light and be fairly dry, or they can dig down and make a little microclimate for themselves that stays nice and humid. And I still offer those species a humid hide as well. Sometimes they don't want to dig in, they just want to be in a shelter. So I make a humid hide for them. And again, from my experimentation, the results have been extremely positive. As I said, I've never lost California desert tortoise hatchling. The one that I did lose, he was already soft, the plastron, he was gone. I tried to revive him, I tried to keep him going, I couldn't save that one. But the ones that I've gotten from an early age before they suffer from the chronic dehydration, which is another subject we can talk about if we want to. I think I'm out of time. All of the ones that I've gotten at an early
like we did at the other place.
Oh, good. All of the ones that I've gotten have survived and thrived and gone on and done very, very well. Let me touch on that then. This is another thing for anybody raising hatchlings or breeding. Chronic dehydration in the hatchlings. Here's what happens. You've heard the term hatchling failure syndrome. I think we should rename it breeder failure syndrome. What I have found is when you take these little babies, put them on dry substrate and soak them once a week, have them under a warm enclosure, under a hot bowl, they dehydrate. This chronic dehydration at their first few days and first few weeks of life, it damages their internal organs, especially their kidneys. These babies, they don't show any outward sign. They walk around, they truck along, they bask, they eat really well. You soak them and they drink, everything seems fine. You start to notice that after 3 or 4 weeks, your baby is the same size it was when you first got it. Some of you may have gone through this. They don't grow very fast. They usually, my sulcata babies hatch at 35 to 39 grams is my range, that's typical. These hatchling failure syndrome babies, be it leopard tortoise, California desert tortoise, or sulcata tortoise, they hit about 48, 50 grams and they sort of stall there. They don't grow any bigger than that. Months go by and they stay that size. Then pretty soon they start to get a little lethargic, they stop eating as much, maybe their eyes look like they're not opening as well. The plastron gets really soft if people notice it. Sometimes in the more advanced stage you just see bruising on the plastron. I don't know exactly what's happening here, but basically all systems are failing and they're shutting down. And within a week or two they die. So you call your breeder and say, hey, that baby I bought from you 6 months ago, it just died. Well, it was fine when it left here, there was all, this must be something you did wrong because you're new to tortoises. This goes on over and over and over again. If you took those same babies, soaked them every day from the time they hatched, and kept them in a damp, kept them in humid environment, every one of them will survive. I've asked some of the big breeders, what's your loss rate for your babies? Most of them I don't think know because they sell those babies and they still have an egg tube and they're getting them out the door as fast as they can. But the ones that have kept track, well, maybe 10%. None of mine died. All of mine survived. I had one sulcata baby out of several hundred die. He hatched at 172 days, where they normally hatch at 90 days. When he hatched out, he was 19 grams instead of the 35 to 39. There's obviously something wrong with him from day one. And that guy, he lived for about 2 months and didn't make it. That's the only sulcata baby that I have hatched that ever died using these methods. You have a question, little girl?
Was the one that you said had its shell like melted that was pyramiding by the wind? Did that happen to be Chewy?
That was Chewy. My little girl knows Chewy. More questions? Yes, sir.
We have a 31-year-old sulcata and a 20-year-old California.
Yeah.
How often do we soak them? How often do they need to get cold?
On the adults, on the big ones, I don't think it matters as much. Here's my preference. You could go months and never soak them. As long as they have drinking water, they'll probably be fine. You don't need to do anything. I prefer, because my climate is so hot and so dry all the time, I prefer to soak. In the summertime, I soak them once or twice a week, the big ones like that. Probably don't have to. I just like to. It makes me feel. I also put up sprinklers for them, and I make mud wallows, and I do fun stuff like that for them. I try to keep them hydrated. Here's my theory on soaking adult tortoises. If you do it every day, it won't harm anything. I've heard that it speeds up the food, and they don't have enough gut transit time, and they don't get full nutrients. If they weren't getting full nutrients, would they still grow? Would they still be prospering and thriving? If I was running food too fast through these tortoises in such a way that they couldn't digest it properly, wouldn't they just not grow, or wouldn't they not thrive? Instead, I see exactly the opposite. It's like putting water on a plant. It just grows and grows and grows. The more water I give it, the more it grows. So that's my theory on soaking adults. In the hot summer months, I like to do it once or twice a week. In the winter months, I usually don't do it at all. Number one, it's kind of cold outside a lot of days. We have hot days like this. I've been soaking my adults the last few days because we had such warm temperatures. But they haven't been soaked for probably a month or two before that.
Ours just came out. It's just
Well, I have all tropical species that don't hibernate, so I'm talking about sulcatas and leopard tortoises.
You had a sulcata in a big pool.
Yep,
How does he get in?
I lifted and put it in.
How heavy is he?
That guy, he was only about 60, 65 pounds in that
Ours is
picture.
over 100.
Right, so good luck, sir. welcome to the third largest species of tortoise in the world. Go get a buddy with a strong back, or a couple of young kids from down the block. Yes, ma'am. Yep. Mine do too. What you can do, what I like to do with mine, is depending on your yard. I'm on a ranch. It's all dirt. I got 5 acres out there. I can do whatever I want. I just get a shovel and I dig out a depression, fill it up, and I make a big mud wallow. They just get in there, they fling mud on their backs, and most of the summer, Dean will tell you, my tortoises walk around covered in caked in mud. Oh, and my adults nowadays, I decided to try this a couple years ago, and I really like the results. Rather than let them burrow where I don't want them to, I went and started a burrow in the middle of the yard, away from the walls, away from any buildings, out in the middle of the acreage. And it took them about 2 weeks to find it. They went over there, and then I was driving out one day, and I looked over, I see the dirt flipping. And sure enough, in 3 days, my 3 adult sulcatas had dug that burrow 17 feet deep. By the end of summer, they had made it 22 feet deep. The next summer, they put in passing lanes, so if one was blocking the entrance, they could get around him. It was hilarious, but they never went deeper than 22 feet. And the bottom was a chamber big enough to turn around. I know how deep it was because one of the guys I work with went all the way down. I went about halfway and I'm like, that's enough. I came back up. But I've been letting them use, my adults now, getting back to your soaking question, I let them use this natural burrow in the summertime because the ground temperature is 80 degrees all summer long and it works great. I think when they're down there at 22 feet, I got the temperature probe down and I could still get a reading off of it from about 15 feet down the hole, so probably 10 feet or so from the surface estimation. And it was 74 degrees on a 97-degree day at the surface. So it gets much cooler down there underground.
Ours never dug.
Some don't.
I got a top enclosure, he goes inside, and it's looking good.
Yep.
No air out the flow, and he loves it.
My adults, they would, I had at one time 4 females and the 1 male. So I had 5 adults and the 1 enclosure. About every 6 months, one of them would start trying to dig somewhere. I would just pull down a hole, kick the dirt back in, and drop a big cinder block or something there, walk away. That would be it for the next 6 months. So some of them are really prone to dig, and some of them just aren't. Daisy, that underground enclosure that I made, at first I wanted her to have the natural earth under her, so I didn't put a bottom on it. And she went down there and all was fine for a couple of months. One day, I pulled the top and I looked down there, and she has dug like under the edge of it, and I can still see her. She was there. She just made a little like pallet sort of thing. I pulled her out of there, I filled it back in, and next day she dug it back out. Filled it back in, put a brick there. Next day she went to the edge of the brick and dug it again. This went on for a few days. I let about a week go by, and I kept checking on her every day. She wasn't going any further. I'm like, okay, well, she just wants a little snug spot. I'll let her have that. 2-3 weeks went by. I went, well, I better check on it. I looked down there. The entire enclosure that you saw, that hollow area, was like full of dirt. And I went down there. I got pail after pail, and I dug it out so I could get down in there. I reached my hand. I looked with the flashlight. It went around the corner, and I couldn't see any further. It was at least 5 feet that I could see. So I had to wait for her to decide to come back above ground. I blocked the entrance so she couldn't back in. I went down there and I shoved, I don't know how much dirt. I kept shoving dirt down the hole and pushing it. Took forever. I finally reached the bottom and I got that hole filled back in. I dug the whole thing out, flattened it out, and I retrofitted a wooden plywood bottom to that thing. I left gaps. You can imagine I had to take it in 4 pieces and get it down the hatch. Get it down there, and I used 2x4s and fasten it all to the side. So there's 1.5 to 1 inch gaps between the pieces, and so I get some of the earthy humidity and earth moving air and temperature and stuff coming up through there. But basically, she can't dig anymore.
So ours has dirt. We have dirt inside the enclosure.
Yeah.
Should I put that orchid stuff in there?
No, not for an outdoor one. I would.
They're old enough?
The orchid bark is just for raising babies indoors, for indoor enclosures primarily. You can put a substrate down if you
You
want.
just saved me a lot of work.
Oh, I just use dirt. And I'll tell people this too. Some people will get on our tortoise forum and they'll say, well, tortoise forum, by the way. Some people will join the forum and they'll come and say, well, I don't have any money, I don't have any of this, I can't afford to buy this, I spent all my money in Petco and I bought the wrong things. Just go get yard dirt. When they're outside sunning, aren't they going to be on the ground? Well, use that same ground. When I move my guys outside, they live on the ground. So there's no reason you can't use that ground inside. Just expect you're going to bring some bugs.
They go in there, the California dug a little pit, and he
Yeah.
just loves that.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
My soul tide is not a breeder either. There's like one portion in the backyard where we leave like this little mud hole thing. I just leave it there, fill it with water and splash on it. And I don't have something either. And we let it there. He just leaves that one little mud hole. I just leave it be in that portion of the yard and he wants to.
Any secrets on how to keep 2 males fighting?
Nope. Yeah. It's not a secret. It's not a secret though. It's called a wall. They can't fight at all. Scooter and Bert grew up together as babies. I remember I got them from Walter Allen. I raised them together as hatchlings. When they were about a year, 2 years old, somebody gave Dolores, who was about a year, 6 months younger than them, so they were similarly sized. They all lived in harmony, everything was great. I thought for the longest time that Bert was a female. Very small gullers, no concavity. He was 8, 9 years old, no concavity at all. The tail was kind of iffy. So small head, like a female-sized head. A lot of the signs pointed to female. I thought I had 2 females and a male, which is, hey, that's a great ratio, right, if you're going to breed. Turns out, this is another speculation of mine. I think if there's a very boisterous, dominant male and they're living together, it will suppress the secondary sexual characteristics of the other male. And when Bert developed, boy, it came quick. The plastron concavity, it seemed to pop up overnight. Obviously, it took months, but it popped up very, very quickly. And then just one day, I heard the noise, I heard the ruckus, and I went over them, and 2 of them were just knocking heads. And I separated them, put them in their night box for the night, close the door. Next morning, bam, bam, there was no way. I tried several other times. Our friend, Dave Friend, told me the technique. When he got a new tortoise in his pen with 70 or so sulcatas, and he got an aggressive male, he would walk over and just flip it on its back, walk away from it for a few minutes, let it realize it had lost the fight, come back and put it back over. And he said for the most part that was working for him. I tried that technique, it didn't work at all. At all. So,
Sounds kind of brutal.
yeah. The father of Daisy, the tortoise that my guinea pig, my first tortoise that I tried these humid hydrated methods with, her father was a sulcata assassin. Somebody had given him to somebody, and he was in the pen with all the others. A big mixed pen with like 12 of them in there. One day the guy goes to work, comes home, finds one of his sulcatas dead, just smashed. I mean, just broken open. And he's going, oh my God, how did this happen? You would think at that point he would separate him. He didn't, because everything seemed fine. 6 months goes by, everything's fine, comes home, finds another one dead. It wasn't until he found the third adult male dead that he realized, I got a problem and I need to do something. So finally the guy separates him. But that was the father of Daisy. And you saw the picture of Daisy. She's 4 pounds in that picture, going right up to a 60-pound female, going, hey, come on, let's fight. She was crazy. And if I put her near Tuck and Trey, like you saw the one picture with a young, I think it was Tuck in that picture, and Daisy, she was trying to go after him. I snapped that picture and then I had to pull her away because she was just
So
very, very
small
aggressive.
can hurt bigger.
Yeah. She thought when she was so little that she should dominate every living tortoise within her sight until the big male taught her that lesson.
I got the California, 20 years old, the big 120 pound.
Yeah.
He's ramming the big one just sits there.
Oh, I would never put them together. I thought you had them in separate enclosures.
Well, they do have separate enclosures, but every once in a while they meet.
I would never let them together. I would never mix species at all. Here's the other thing about immunity and stuff. Over in Africa, for millions of years, they've been evolving to deal with whatever parasites and pathogens exist in that part of the world. The California desert tortoises, likewise, have been evolving to deal with the parasites and pathogens in this part of the world. So they have a means of dealing with whatever bugs are in that area, and these guys, but these guys don't have a means for dealing with the bugs that come from these guys, and vice versa. And I've seen whole collections been killed that way. I've seen mass die-offs in very expensive
Keep
collections.
them separated all the time.
I would at all times. You've already introduced them, so there's a chance that you've already had disease transmission between the two, and if they're alive and you got lucky and everything went okay.
It's been about a year and a half.
But you're still gambling, and it could be tomorrow that he contacts the disease specialist. There's a lot of times they're carrying these things around, and they just lay dormant, and then one day it'll awaken and they'll start shedding the disease organism. This can happen. That's why a lot of things are difficult to diagnose, like cryptosporidea, for example. Very, very difficult to diagnose. You can do people all day long, and they'll come up negative for months on end. You can do a gastric lavage, which is a very invasive test where they fill up the stomach and stir it around, and it can still come up negative. That tortoise, meanwhile, is shedding that stuff on a regular basis, and anything coming in contact with the feces that it's shedding can get that cryptosporidea organism. It's a bad hit. Best policy, in my opinion, is to keep them separated. Keep species separated all the time.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
We have one sulcata, and I go out to and I basically like, oh, this is are they sociable? I mean, are they doing
Oh.
one? No, by itself is good.
This is, again, my opinion.
That's my third question.
Most tortoises are happiest when they're the sole king of their castle. There is some evidence, like pancake tortoises, they live in these rocky outcroppings in the wild, and you'll see 5 or 6 of them in close proximity. Well, is that because there's nowhere else to hide, or is that because they like each other's company? It's an unknown, but sometimes you see that. Red-footed tortoises, they tend to do very well in groups in captivity. In the wild, though, you don't see them hanging out in groups together. You might see 2 on the same track, go in the same direction or something, especially in breeding season, you might see something like that. But generally speaking, they don't hang out in groups in the wild. Then you have the other example, the Galapagos tortoises. We've all seen these pictures of these beautiful, big, open areas with, 100 Galapagos tortoises spread out. Are they all there because that's where the food and water is? Or are they all there to congregate? Or are they all there for breeding purposes? Generally speaking, even that species is a solitary species. In captivity, they can tolerate the presence of others. It doesn't mean they like it. In the case of sulcatas, if you do the groups right, like I have my group of females, they do fine. I can't keep 2 males together. I can't keep 2 males in that group. There are people like Dave Friend is one. He's got 60 of them in one big, 2-acre pen, and mostly they do fine. But if you've been in his place, he's got that one you have to keep off to the side because he can't get along with the group. So even in that case, there are exceptions. In larger groups, you stand a better chance of success with mixed groups, but there's no guarantee. Sometimes you still have to separate out individuals. So the happiest tortoise, in my opinion, is a tortoise who lives all alone. Same thing with dogs. Dog that lives all alone with just his people. They get all the attention to themselves. They get all the best food. They get all the best everything, all for themselves. They don't have to share the best sleeping spaces. They don't have to share the food. They get it all for themselves. Now, if you want more than one, get more than one, but I wouldn't get a pair of anything. Usually pairs are never going to work out, even if it's the same sex. Even two females sometimes don't work out. So if you're going to keep more than one, it's best to have at least 3 or a larger group. And once they start reaching adolescence and maturity, better to have just one male. In most species, most of the time, there are exceptions. Like I've been hearing that some of the hingebacks sometimes do better in pairs. The Forestinis, sometimes they say do better in pairs, sometimes not. So there are exceptions, but most of the tortoises we keep, sulcatas, California desert tortoises are very territorial. Russians are a horrible one; they want to kill everything. Most of them are better either in groups with a single male or by themselves. So no, your guys pretty happy. More questions?